So I've been running Dungeons and Dragons games for a long time, going way back to like the basic set in AD&D. And AD&D even had an illusionist class that people generally play once, because illusions tend to be something that seem fun, but when you actually get to using them in the game, they can become kind of a disappointing mess. So to address this, I wrote a free, concise guide to illusions available on Dungeon Masters Guild. So, raw illusions, rules as written. So there are a variety of illusion spells, and some of them have very specific, kind of non-confusing descriptions to them. So the spell just kind of does what it says it does. Things like mirror image, for example, or blur. Where it becomes a bit more challenging are spells that allow far more flexibility, such as things like silent image and major image. And a big concern is, how do you tell when it's an illusion and when it's not? So every spell, of course, in 5th edition has kind of its own rule. It's all its own thing. But minor illusion, silent image, and major image, and programmable image describe two ways to break or pierce or discern the illusion. The first one is the physical interaction. Also has been sort of clarified by various tweets and discussions. Observing physical interaction automatically reveals the illusion. There's also the option to use a intelligence investigation check, and that goes against the spell save DC. Now, the effect of discerning illusion does vary between the spells. For example, mirror image, there's no discerning, it just does what it does. Usually what happens is that you see through it, and then in many cases you just literally see through the illusion. It's no longer something that you blocks your vision, etc. Now, while the intelligence investigation check is pretty clear, you take your action, you try to investigate, you succeed or fail, there is the question of like when and why an NPC decides to make this intelligence check. Even though the mechanism is clear, it's not entirely clear, obviously, why this would be done. And that, of course, comes down to the DM. Also, in terms of like physical interactions, the exact thing that counts can also be subject to some degree of interpretation. Now, there's often the question of, suppose somebody says, hey, it's an illusion. Do you automatically discern the illusion? Someone in your party or someone, NPC yells to another NPC, or it's being cast. And the answer is, by the rules as written, no. Merely knowing that it's an illusion does not discern it, because, again, by the rules, there's two methods: physical interaction, or observing physical interaction, or that check. Now, if someone, does say it's an illusion, or someone's, casting an illusion, you could, use your intelligence investigation check to try to investigate it, or interact with it in some manner. Now, what about the various senses in the game? So, True Sight, of course, is the best of this. Its description just says straight up, you see through visual illusions, you automatically succeed on saving throws against them, so super useful. Now, what about Blind Sight? Now, that's a bit more complicated and does get debated, but by the rules as written, it does discern, it blind sees through visual illusions. How it works with other qualities of illusions, matter of interpretation. It would depend on, how much the DM wants to get into the how does this blind sight work type of thing. Tremor sense. Now, some may think that, tremor sense would give away that something is illusion, and it does pinpoint, the location of, vibrations. It doesn't actually discern illusions. There can be kind of the question of, would a creature, be suspicious if there was, its tremor sense wasn't tingling? And again, that's all up to the dungeon master. And there's nothing in the way it's written that says tremor sense, tells you that it's not. Now, if you're a player character who happened to have it, and you said to the DM, oh, do I detect any vibrations? The DM says, well, no, you might suspect an illusion. What about dark vision and normal vision? Well, no, they don't pierce illusions. There's also been some discussion about Do illusions count as creatures? There's quite a few descriptions in the game that, involve a creature can do this, etc. So illusions are not creatures, with an exception, as was, the Phantasmal Steed, for example. But things like Silent Image, etc. They can create things that looks like creatures, but not creatures. They're also not objects, so they're spell effects. They're kind of their own thing there. So they don't count as an ally for things like sneak attack, etc. They don't count as an enemy for other effects that involve enemies. And not being a creature, they don't provoke opportunity attacks. So if you have an illusion by something and you cause it to move away, it doesn't get an opportunity attack. What does it think about that? How does this work? Raw is silent. It's just not a creature, so it just doesn't. However you want to explain that, up to the DM. So what about cover? The answer is, unless a spell says otherwise, no. Visual illusions, if they're working, can obviously provide concealment, so you can't, see what's behind them, but they don't actually provide cover. Again, unless the spell specifies, like, this illusion provides cover. Now, what about attacking or targeting illusions? Some, yeah. Mirror Image has got rules for that. Phantom Steed creates a creature that you can attack. Other spells, though, don't provide anything beyond physical interaction. Now, Xanthar's Guide to Everything includes some rules about spells, handling spells, targeting things that are invalid targets. So, illusions, with some exceptions, like Phantom Steed, are usually not creatures or objects. So, they can't be valid targets for spells that target creatures or spells that target objects. If the spell can target anything, then presumably, yeah. So if a target's invalid, what happens? Well, by the Xanthars, nothing happens to the target. What does that mean in terms of a physical interaction, breaking the illusion? Don't know. Doesn't really say. You could take nothing happens as nothing is noticed, no interaction, not revealed. Now, what about spells that allow saving throws? Now, in that case, according to Xanthars at least, that the target is not exposed as being an invalid target, and if the spell allows a saving throw, it seems to have succeeded, and it's not exposed. So that wouldn't reveal an illusion. If, other cases, target invalid target just results in the perception the spell did nothing to it. So this is all DM interpretation. Does it, does this count as a physical interaction? If the spell is perceived as doing nothing, again, all DM interpretation. That's kind of set by how your table works. In terms of if you're looking for advice, and free advice is always worth less than you pay for it, what I usually do is, if it's something that would be, noticeable, you'd see it, normally it would do something and it does nothing, I may reveal to the characters. Again, this is pretty vague stuff, and you'd pretty much have to go on a spell by spell basis based on how you run your table, and of course, if players rather can always make their own inference. If they're throw a spell at something and nothing happens, they may think, possibly an illusion. So what about handling NPCs? That's kind of been the biggest problem when you're running a game, is players, come up with these ideas, sometimes good, sometimes terrible, and you have to kind of, figure out, would my NPCs, what would they do? Would they try to interact with them to expose the illusion? Would they try to make a investigation check? What would they do? Now, the usual guide, of course, is, well, you shouldn't play NPCs as fools, unless they are fools. Their response should be based on things like their intelligence, their senses, their knowledge of the NPC, the knowledge that they have, especially about the player characters. If the NPCs are, enemies of the PCs, and they know that the PCs are throwing out illusions pretty regularly, they'd be suspicious. If it's just like a random encounter with some oozes, the oozes, although their blind sight might pierce it. If you just random encounters with the creatures, they're probably not going to be, oh, this is a terrible example, that they're probably not going to suspect automatically illusions. So intelligent creatures, who know about spellcasting would tend to be aware that they're illusions. And if stuff happens after the PCs, cast a spell, they might suspect something. Now, Xanthar's guide, of course, includes spell identification rules that if you have an NPC with intelligence arcana, they may be inclined to identify a spell. Now, this would reveal to them that it's an illusion spell if they succeed, but, as we saw earlier, just knowing that an illusion spell was cast, it's an illusion, but you don't discern the illusion. And this gets into some debate, like if I know it's an illusion spell being cast, don't I discern through it? And again, you can change that at your table, but as written, simply knowing that someone casts, say, major image, you don't automatically pierce the illusion. You'd have to interact with it or try the check. So what about unintelligent NPCs? Let's go with like wolves, for example. All the wolves are, they do have intelligence. They're not like smart spellcasters typically. Players might think, okay, things like wolves and stuff, they would, they would not suspect illusions, which is true. But something like a wolf might reasonably, be suspicious of someone that doesn't match up with their experience and senses. So, for example, a wolf would not be thinking, that pile of meat that has no scent, that is perhaps silent image trying to deceive me. They wouldn't think that. But the lack of smell, they don't smell any meat smell, might make them, suspicious. And so in cases like that where an enemy may notice something incongruous, it wouldn't be, aha, I'm detecting an illusion. It would be, say, a roll to see if the creature, kind of sorts it out, like, oh, that's not meat. And of course, even an animal or beast or monstrosity that's not particularly intelligent, might check things out. Like if there's a pile of, again, illusionary meat to distract the wolf, once it goes, it sticks its snout in there, it would realize, hey, this is not meat. How they respond to it, of course, then becomes a matter of DM interpretation. Now, one thing, of course, is that, again, I've had players through the years come up with these, try to come up with clever ways to use illusions. For example, like, obvious things like a wall to hide behind, and of course, it's kind of disappointing that in one round that, the enemy fires like an arrow and they're like, oh, look, if the arrow went through it, it's illusion, spell wasted. And so it generally is to make, play fun. It's good to sort of, not like obviously break the rules, but kind of allow players to have their illusions, if they're well thought out and well planned, to let them work. If the arrows are being shot at the PCs and, they're using the wall as cover, or concealment rather, because you can't use them as cover, and they're using it in a clever way, then maybe the arrows don't like go through the wall and expose it automatically. Again, it's, if you're running the game, your table, but in general, if players put into a clever plan, it's not like really, kind of bad. It's good to reward them, for coming up with some plans. Now, what about players? Well, players can always decide to do a thing. They can just say, hey, I'm going to try to investigate this, and it has a cost. So if a person is investigating what they think is an illusion, they're not doing something else. And of course, they can try and interact with things. But this doesn't happen too often, but if your players are just constantly doing that, checking everything for illusions, you may want to say, hey, it's just, not. Let's, move on. So what about other ways to use illusions? So raw, of course, they just do what they do. And I like to, encourage my players to do kind of interesting things with the illusions. And I've had campaigns where people really wanted to go all in on illusions. And then they're often like kind of disappointed. They try to do a thing and it's like, well, that didn't work because the rules don't allow that. Trying to provoke attacks of opportunity, for example, or using an illusion to try to distract an enemy to, get advantage. Now, these are obviously completely optional rules that I made up to allow some expanded uses for standard illusions. Now, whenever you make changes to rules, it's always a good idea to let the players know, like, hey, these are the changes to the rules. Everyone cool with this? So that way it's not like unfortunate surprises during the game. So there are some things that can be useful for expanding illusions. One is I've often had players try to they're trying to intimidate somebody, so they create an illusion of say like an ogre or a scary looking knight or like a wraith or something to try to help intimidate somebody, or they may be trying to persuade someone, and they might create the illusion of something that is very valuable to kind of lure them in with it. So one option is to allow, if players cast something like silent image or major image and they're concentrating on it, they could take an action to provide advantage on the next charisma, say intimidate or persuade or perform or deception that they do. And you could have the players kind of like describe what they're doing, or if players rather not come up with like descriptions, they could just say, I'm trying to do something scary to improve my intimidate. And this provides a kind of expanded use for illusions. It's not powerful. It's not like if you intimidate something, it gets the fear condition, or if you persuade something, it gets charmed. But it provides a way for players to enhance the skills of their PCs and use illusions, typically outside of combat. Naturally, if a creature knows that it's an illusion, the illusion wouldn't work on it. The help action. Players have often asked, when they're new to the game, hey, could I create like an illusion of something that's, distracting someone so, like the rogue can get an advantage? And the answer, of course, by Raw is no, can't do it. It's not a creature. So the help option allows this to be done, in combat, to take the help action, to assist a creature in combat, and it must be close to it. And of course, if the creature knows it's an illusion, it doesn't work on it. And this is actually, it's something useful, but also, kind of a weak trait, because it's the help action takes up a full action. And I mean, it's normally an action anyways, but essentially this allows you to do kind of like help at a distance. And it can be something if you have a character who's like a caster and they got like their major image spell going and they're out of everything else, then this could be something useful for them to do. Because one way to make the game, enjoyable is that the players always have something to do on their turn, even if it's something, fairly minor like help, etc. Having a turn and being able to do nothing, pretty boring. Provoking. Now again, raw illusions aren't creatures, they don't provoke. So if you create like the illusion of say like an ogre beside someone and have it, run away to try to get the enemy to swing on it, it just, whatever reason, it just doesn't. It doesn't do that. So there can be an option to allow it to provoke. This would work normally, create an illusion of creature, moves away, and the NPC can decide, make the attack or not. The obvious cost of this is an attack against the illusion would reveal it as an illusion. Anybody who observes that, then it would be revealed. So it's got kind of a high cost. But there are situations where it might be worth the trade. So if you have, if there's a situation where you have one character about to drop and they want to run away, but the monster is going to probably drop them with one shot, an illusion running off could provoke it, use up the attack of opportunity, allowing the character to escape. Again, all optional. Now, one classic use, of course, has been mimicking spells. Going way back, to AD&D, remember when someone would play an illusionist, usually just once, they would often try to, mimic the effects of other spells, creating like a wall of fire, for example, for the illusion of one, and trying to use that. And quickly, people tended to learn it's better to cast Wall of Fire than Illusion of Wall of Fire, because generally illusions in many games they just don't work that well. Now, this could be useful if you just happen to have like an illusion spell and not the other spell. Creative use of it to imitate other spells could be effective. Now, Creatures, of course, may notice this. So Xanthar's Guide to Everything, again, has rules for spotting spells. So if a character goes to cast and the enemy recognizes that as, major image, and they create a wall of fire, the creature will go, oh, that's clearly, a illusion of a wall of fire. They don't automatically, of course, discern it, but they would know that that's not a wall of fire, given those rules. And of course, if a creature has already perceived, discerned the illusion, they are not going to be fooled by it. Now, illusions can be quite useful as a means of concealment. Essentially, instant concealment on the battlefield. You just create an illusion. Some of them can be moved. So you could, conceal a creature moving in combat, possibly to allow it to gain advantage on an attack, then also possibly exposing the illusion. Or you could use it to allow a creature to escape. You put an illusion around like an ally, and it can't be seen through. They could, run off if the opponent can't see them escaping. Now, of course, this can be kind of weak because often you're better off, doing something like, fog cloud, etc. But it could be useful. Final thing, Phantasmal Force. So, Phantasmal Force, fairly decent spell, and Raw, in the discussion around it, has laid out that you can do things like create a bag on somebody's head that moves with them. The spell also, of course, does damage, provided the target is within 5 feet of the phantasm or within its area. And what I've done is, I haven't really changed the spell at all, but so sometimes players read it like, what does all this do? And this is sort of a way to say to players, okay, here are some options that the spell does, and here's ones to pick from. So the two options are kind of like, is it fixed? For example, you might create a illusion of a pool of acid in front of a door to keep, somebody deter them from leaving or deter people from coming through the door. They're also mobile phantasms. For example, the classic bag on the head or dragon, whatever, pursuing them. And so you could ask the player says, I cast, Phantasmal Force. You could say, well, is it going to be a fixed thing? What is it? Is it going to be mobile? What is it? And one thing about the spell is it doesn't actually have to make any sense because the Phantasmal Force is such that the creature just kind of like believes it if it, fails the save. The Phantasm, of course, can also be damaging or non-damaging. Generally, it's not surprisingly, since, damage is good, generally you'd want to do damaging unless you're, don't want to hurt the target. Now, the damage can have any appearance you want. It could be like fire or like bites or whatever, but it's always psychic. So if it's if you create like fire on a creature's head or something biting it, it's not fire damage or like piercing damage. It's always psychic. And if a creature is immune or vulnerable to what it appears to be, fire or piercing, doesn't matter. All that matters is psychic. The target is immune to psychic damage, no damage. If the target is vulnerable to psychic damage, more damage. The other sort of thing to ask is this going to block vision? Is it going to be something, that, it can't see through? Could it be like a box around it, the classic bag on the head, etc.? And then, you could answer, it's very effective use of the spell because, kind of one of the best ways to do it is create like a murder bag on somebody's head that's like, biting them or something. It goes with them. They can't see through it. So they're in effect, their vision is blocked, although they're not actually blinded. They don't have that condition. They just can't see, and they're taking damage every turn. So super powerful. So how do you tell if you're the target of Phantasmal Force? How do you tell? Well, interaction with it doesn't reveal it. So unlike the other illusions, physical interaction doesn't discern the illusion. And the way they describe that in the spell is that the victim always rationalizes what is happening. So whatever logical outcome comes about, they're like, that makes sense. Now, our target can use its action to examine the phantasm and make an intelligence investigation check against that spell save DC. If the check succeeds, the target realizes it's an illusion, spell ends. Now, not surprisingly, in discussions of this, people often ask, why would anybody ever do that? Because the spell explicitly says the target rationalizes logical outcomes, so it's not clear why you would ever decide to make that check. I mean, probably the closest thing people have come to as well. If your companions yell at you, you have an illusion, you have phantasmal force on you, they might decide to make their check. But someone might say, well, the spell says you rationalize whatever weird stuff happens, so you just rationalize your friends yelling at you. So, pretty, in a way, bad guidance there, in a sense. There seemed to be like almost no reason you'd ever try to make that save. Now, because you're taking damage, etc. Now, in general, though, it's probably reasonable to allow PCs to make this check, unless because you can have the debate about like when would I do this or why, and you could just bog down the game about arguing endlessly about when a character would. And probably the easiest thing to do would be to say, well, yeah, you could just let the PC, they take their action, they wish, make the roll, and if they succeed, then they break the illusion, and you can just give some just essentially you're essentially kind of like allowing them a chance to break it. And the reason why is because, again, to speed up the game, and it can make some sense for kind of like obscure abstract game balance concerns to allow this roll to be made by a creature, because the spell is actually better in a sense in blindness deafness, because you can get the effect the creature can't see, and it's also doing damage. But again, none of that is raw. And so, like, when creatures decide to do this, when players decide to do this, not clear like why they would ever even bother to check. But for player characters, probably easiest, if a player says, well, I like to make my check, it's probably easiest to say, sure, use your action, make the roll, even if it's not particularly justified. So that's a look at the Concise Guide to Illusions, and I hope you find this useful in your game. And again, it's available on DM's Guide for free. Not even pay what you want. You can't even pay for it. It's free. So stay safe, and I'll see you in the future, or you'll see an illusion in the future, or maybe everything's an illusion. Anyways, philosophy.